So I hope you are enjoying these summaries of, not all, but some of the chapters in this book, Race and Ethnicity, the Basics. I hope that you are, I'm hoping that you may have maybe already read some of this, or that you are watching or listening to this video at the same time as having the book open. Maybe you've split your screens. So when we hear things spoken to us at the same time as us reading it, we're able to highlight words that we don't know, so that when we go back, we can go to the words, we can copy them into a dictionary, and this is a way for us to greatly increase how fast and easy not only our English language develops, but about how we learn new concepts. We get to grips with new ideas, new theories, for example. And so we've spent a bit of time in chapter 4, which has looked at the dynamics of ethnic conflict. We had a look at the types of ethnic conflict which existed, ranging from genocide through to social exclusion or expulsion. And chapter 5, we're going to do a number of lectures based on chapter 5. And although chapter 4 looked at issues of ethnic conflict, we're going to be looking at models of incorporation, about how ethnic minorities, the range of ways that ethnic minorities may be assimilated or not. We range from forms of assimilation to ideas of cultural pluralism, of symbolic ethnicity, of Anglo-conformity, of Americanization if you are in America. We could also add here Thaiization, about how, so those are all forms of assimilation, ranging from that into multiculturalism, where there is no attempt to assimilate but accommodate, and then into models of trans-regionalism and regional autonomy. Okay, so why don't we get started, and we'll go into full screen, and that way we can just romp through. So how do racial or ethnic minorities become integrated into the mainstream? This is the topic that is addressed in chapter 5. As should be clear from the discussion in previous chapters, that there is nothing inevitable about minority incorporation. Exclusion can persist. Moreover, as we shall see soon, incorporation does not necessarily mean that racial or ethnic groups end up on equal terms with members of the dominant society. Nevertheless, when two or more groups interact over time, their social relations tend to have an impact on group members, shaping the way they view the world and act on it. At present, sociologists primarily make use of three concepts to describe and assess the dynamics of racial and ethnic relations: assimilation, multiculturalism, and transculturalism. This trio of concepts will be the focus of this chapter. So, assimilation. Unlike multiculturalism and transculturalism, which have become significant sociological theories recently, assimilation has been part and parcel of the conceptual arsenal of sociologists from the formative period of the discipline. Indeed, sociologists began to use the term in the late 19th century, and it received what is generally received to be its canonical or most important articulation in the hands of Robert Park, one of the prime movers in the famous Chicago School of Sociology about a century ago. Until recently, the term was widely used in American sociology until the European counterparts preferred to use different terms with a similar meaning, such as inclusion, integration, incorporation. This has begun to change in recent years, as is evident in a recent comparative study of the assimilation of children of migrants in 8 European countries. Thus, it appears that we may be heading in the future towards the use of a common language. So the race relations cycle, let's look at what Parkes wrote originally in the 1920s. Much has been made of the race relations cycle, which Parkes described on a few occasions as a series of recurring stages of engagement between groups, from initial encounter through to the end of the process. The cycle moved through 4 distinct stages. The first was contact, which took place on the racial frontier, as groups that had no previous contact found themselves in places where they interact. This stage would give way to conflict, which results because of competition over resources and the desire for control. While overt conflict can persist for a significant period of time, gives way to accommodation, which permits the establishment of a stable social order, but one characterized by power asymmetries or inequalities, characterized by various manifestations of inequality. The stability created during this stage established the conditions for improving intergroup relations over time. Now, this leads to the 4th and final stage, which is called assimilation, at which point the boundaries that have separated groups break down, not only culturally and socially, but physically as well, primarily through widespread intermarriage. The result of the 4-stage process is that the original distinct groups disappear as a largely homogeneous group takes its place. We call this a cycle, can be something of a misnomer, for once the final stage is achieved, the process ends for 2 groups in question. It's a cycle only in as far as it presumably repeats itself whenever 2 groups come into contact with each other. And so here is a representation of this proposal by Robert Parkes. Now, this is very dated now. This is a good way to begin to be thinking and talking about these issues. Contact between 2 groups, which leads to conflict, which leads to accommodation, and then assimilation. But inevitably, because of the way that the ethnic makeup of modern nations change, there is another round of contact. So there have been a number of criticisms of the race relations cycle over the last few years. And this includes a criticism by Lehman of what he considers to be its teleological character and its view of social change as moving to an inevitable endpoint. Park, he argues, was part of a large tendency in American sociology that looked at social life through evolutionary ideas, through the theory of evolution, where things were going in a gradual, incremental direction that would inevitably improve. This criticism dovetails with Steinberg's effort to historicize the terms that Park used to describe the stages of the cycle. Steinberg describes contact as a euphemism for colonialism, and competition as a euphemism for conquest and slavery. He goes on to point out that the word accommodation conjures up images of compliance and civility in the face of injustice, and he cites Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a famous criticism of race politics in the US. These criticisms of the race relations cycles as a variant of evolutionary thought are on target. And there is certainly a passage in Park's work that provides the critics with a tempting target, and it is this. The cycle, which takes the form, to state it abstractly, of contact, competition, accommodation and assimilation, is apparently progressive and irreversible. Customs, regulations, immigration restrictions and racial boundaries may slacken the tempo of the movement. It may halt it altogether at time. It cannot change its direction. It cannot at any rate reverse it. A careful reading of Park's work as a whole can lead one to question how significant the race relations cycle actually was in his view of race and ethnic relations in general, or assimilation in particular. Indeed, it's worth noting that in 3 articles written by Park during his lifetime, he explicitly addressed what he meant by assimilation, and he did not make any reference to the cycle. Furthermore, as Lyman notes, 2 decades after his original commentary on race relations cycle, Park had begun to have second thoughts about the idea of social change occurring in an evolutionary fashion. Certainly, he was unconvinced that blacks in America were likely to be assimilated in the foreseeable future, and he was keenly aware that the initial contact between blacks and whites in the US occurred in the 17th century, 3 centuries earlier. Finally, Park was not a rosy-eyed optimist. And in an autobiographical note, Park notes, I knew enough about civilization even at that time to know that progress is a terrible thing. It is so destructive and wasteful. In short, Park thought that assimilation was a powerful but not an inevitable social process. He was well aware of many barriers that marginalized and oppressed groups confront in their quest to become equal members of a larger society. Assimilation is clearly a multi-dimensional phenomenon, a fact that was not always captured by sociologists influenced by the canonical formulation. A half-century after Park's initial formation, Milton Gordon, whose embrace of the general idea of assimilation was personal, published what proved to be an influential study in assimilation in American life. The rationale for the book was to provide the reader with an empirical stock-taking of the state of assimilation in a nation built by immigrants, but which had not experienced a major migration wave since the passage of the anti-immigration legislation in 1924. Thus, it was not an effort at theory construction. Okay, so let's just go out of full screen now, and we'll take a bit of a pause now. So this was Park's idea of this cycle of contact, of conflict, of accommodation and assimilation. So this was a place where thinking about incorporation started, but there are other ideas, and we will go on to look at Gordon's next.